Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Um, Now we deal with chapter 11, lower and lower. I told you in our previous lecture that the chapter was entitled Mrs. Parsots Staircase. That was our previous chapter. We talked about how Louisa and James are descending on this staircase, just like a staircase where it measures the development of their relationship. So whenever there is a progress and development in this relationship, we are stepping a step down this staircase. And this staircase, as you suggested, it's kind of imaginary or something abstract, which measures the development of this relationship. So chapter 10 paved the way for the development of the relationship. And as we discussed in this chapter 10, we said that Mrs. Parsots' role is very effective in developing the gap, in widening and deepening the gap between Louisa and Bounderby. And we had some evidences in that respect. So the chapter 10 highlighted certain points related to the character of a Sparsit, and we mentioned that the Sparsit's role starts to extend to more different things than the representation of the differences between social classes. And we said now her role is to witness and help shape the kind of failure of marriage between Louisa and Bounderby, which consequently will demonstrate the failure of the educational system on Louisa's part. So we have seen how Sparsit is double-faced towards Bounderby. We've seen how Louisa is progressing in her relationship with James Harthouse. We have talked about Stephen and the old women who were reported missing and were suspected for the robbery of the bank. And we have also witnessed how James Harthouse has been talking about Stephen and suspecting him, referring to him as a criminal in the robbery. All these details are somehow being not repeated in the next chapter, but what is continued is the relationship between James and Louisa, which is developing further and further until the end of the book, this particular book the second. So as you see, now we are getting lower and lower. We are moving faster in that staircase, because the relationship between James and Louisa is developing, is going very fast, because Louisa is very fresh, she is very young, and her husband is very old, who cares about money and factories, and he is not like provide her with the kind of love and warmth that James Harthouse is representing or providing. And we know that the writer refers to that from the name of Heart House, the house of the heart, the house which provides love, affection, emotions for Louisa. This has been made clear since James came to Coketown. The chapter begins with little details about how Mr. Gradgrind received and dealt with the death of his wife. This is another point that highlights the practicality, the pragmatic style of life that Mr. Gradgrind uses and lives by. See how he reacted. Mr. Gradgrind, apprised of his wife's decease, made an expedition from London and buried her in a business-like manner. It was not a kind of mourning and sadness and crying and paying attention to his wife. He then, after just like burying his wife, he then returned with promptitude, with fast, to the national cinder heap and resumed his sifting for the odds and ends he wanted. Yani he went back to his work at London. It shows that this man is somehow does not have any kind of emotions, even for the closest person of his family, his wife. In the meantime, Mrs. Sparsit kept unwinking watch and ward, separated from her staircase all the week by the length of iron and road dividing Cooktown from the country house. She maintained her cat-like observation. We need to pay attention to the writer's use of these words, of course. Unwinking watch, cat-like observation, and previously a hawk's eye look in the previous chapter. So the writer tries to show Mrs. Sparsit as a very alert and careful person who keeps all her senses focused on Louisa, her moves, her words, whom she meets, as if she is staging this kind of relationship between her and James Harthouse. So the chapter now focuses on these particular points. We have only 3 characters now, which are the focus of the chapter: Mrs. Sparsit, Louisa, and James. In order for the writer to develop the relationship and reach the outcome that he has been planning to reach since the beginning of book 2, since the advent of James Harthouse. So we have here she maintained her cat-like observation of Louisa through her husband, through her brother, through James Harthouse, through the outsides of letters and packets, through everything animate and inanimate that at any time went near the stairs. This is how Mrs. Sparsit, employing everything to serve her purpose. Your foot on the last step, my lady, said Mrs. Sparsit, apostrophizing the descending figure with the aid of her threatening mitten, and all your art shall never blind me. The time went on until it happened Mr. Bounderby was called away from home by business, which required his presence elsewhere for 3 or 4 days. It was on a Friday that he intimated this to Mrs. Sparsit at the bank, adding, "But you will go down tomorrow, ma'am, all the same." Yani Bounderby was called for business, and Mrs. Sparsit was supposed to go for the house according to the weekly routine that she used to follow. So he says it was on a Friday that he intimated this, "But Sparsit, go down tomorrow, go to my house, all the same, just as usual. You will go down just as if I was there. It will make no difference to you." "Pray, sir," returned Sparsit reproachfully, "let me beg you not to say that. Your absence will make a vast difference to me, sir. I think you very well know." Of course, this is in front of him, but of course, after he is off or away, she would say different words. "Well, ma'am, then you must get on in my absence as well as you can." "Mr. Bounderby," retorted Mrs. Sparsit, "your will is to me a law, sir." Just like what we said in the previous lecture. To obey without obedience or without disobedience. So now Sparsit is going to set a plan in order to discover certain truths about Louisa and James. Bitzer, said Sposset that afternoon, when her patron was gone on his journey, present my compliments to young Mr. Thomas and ask him if he would step up and partake of a lamb chop. She knows how to seduce Tom. Lamb chop, قطعة من اللحم, and walnut ketchup with a glass of India ale, مشروب Hindi. Young Mr. Thomas being usually ready for anything in that way. Of course, he would come so fast in return of being served with these things. Mr. Thomas said, these plain wines being on table, I thought you might be tempted. Thank you, Mrs. Parsots, said the whelp, also described as the whelp by the writer. And then she started siphoning information. تسحب من عند هذه المعلومات. How is Mr. Hothouse, Mr. Tom? Oh, he's all right, said Tom. Where may he be at present? وين راح يكون? He is hunting in Yorkshire. يتصيد بيوركشاير. Sent Lou a basket half as big as a church yesterday. دز الأختي لو سلة كبيرة وكأنها نص كنيسة حجمها. The kind of gentleman now, said Sposset sweetly, whom one might wager to be a good shot. Mr. Hothouse is a great favourite of mine, said Sposset, as indeed he is of most people. I expect to see him tomorrow, returned the whelp. Good news. Now she is taking information. I've got an appointment with him to meet him in the evening at the station here. Now he gave her the required information, and I am going to dine with him afterwards. I believe he is not coming down to the country house for a week or so, being due somewhere else. ما راح يجي للبيت مع لويزا because he is busy doing something else. Which reminds me, would you remember a message to your sister? المسج اللي راح تدزها لويزا. Trouble her. I don't want to trouble her with my society this week, being still a little nervous and better perhaps by my poor self. A kind of camouflage, تمويه, تنطي لويزا that she is not visiting her, just like she promised Bounderby. Giving her a message that she will not be here, so Louisa would be free to receive James. This is a kind of plan that Mrs. Parsots sets. The evening come, she put on her bonnet, Mrs. Parsots, and shawl, and went quickly out, having her reasons for hovering in a furtive way about the station by which a passenger would arrive from Yorkshire. Yani, as Tom said, James would come from Yorkshire this evening, so she went to the station in order to verify this information and to prove its validity. Tom was in attendance and loitered about until the expected train came. It brought no Mr. Hothouse. Then Hothouse was not in Yorkshire, and he is not going to meet Tom at this particular time. So Mrs. Parsots concluded that this is a device, هذه خطة, to keep him out of the way, to keep Tom out of the way, said Parsots. Hothouse is with his sister now. So I told you about the omniscient narrator in the previous lecture. As if we have Mrs. Parsots as an omniscient narrator, Rawi Alim, that feeds us with information. Now she gives us about what comes next. So now she predicts that Hothouse is not in Yorkshire and he is not coming on this train. And Tom was deceived by Hothouse, and Hothouse might be with Louisa now, and she is correct. This is true. So she confirms that the appointment was a device. Appointment between Tom and James was a device to keep the brother away. There they were yonder by the felled tree, bending low among the dewy grass. Nana, she describes them sitting under the tree with grass. He was there secretly and had not now shown himself at the house. ما بين نفسه بالhouse حتى ما ينفضح. He had come on horseback and must have passed through the neighboring fields, for his horse was tied to the meadow side of the fence with a few paces. Then, this is how James sneaked into the garden in order to meet Louisa. And let's have a look at how he describes Louisa. "My dearest love," said he. This is a kind of development. "What could I do, knowing you were alone? Was it possible that I could stay away? You may hang your head to make yourself the more attractive. I don't know what they see in you when you hold it up," thought Mrs. Sparsit. "But you little think, my dearest love, whose eyes are on you." See, this is how the writer shows us that this kind of relationship has developed very further, that Louisa now started to be described by James as a dearest love. That she hung her head was certain. She urged him to go away. حثت جيمس على أن يتركها. She commanded him. مرتب هذا الشيء. But she neither turned her face to him nor raised it. Yet it was remarkable that she sat as still as ever, the amiable woman, in ambuscade. Ambuscade يعني ambush, كمين. "My dear child," said Harthouse. Mrs. Parsots saw with delight that his arm embraced her. خلى إيده عليها. "Will you not bear with my society for a little while? ما تتحملين وجودي في فترة بسيطة?" "Not here," قالت Louisa. "Where, Louisa?" "Not here. But we have so little time to make so much of, and I have come so far, and am altogether so devoted and distracted. Am I to say again that I must be left to myself here? مو قلت لك أوفني هنا وخلصني. But we must meet, my dear Louisa. Where shall we meet?" They both started. The listener started guiltily too, for she thought there was another listener among the trees. It was only rain. And "Shall I ride up to the house for a few minutes? Your cruel commands are implicitly to be obeyed." Now she managed to get rid of him. She somehow dismissed him. "My dearest love, my dearest Louisa, I cannot go myself or let you go in this hard abuse of your power." And Mrs. Sparsit saw him detain her, يحجزها, with his encircling arm, and heard him then and there within her, Mrs. Sparsit greedy hearing, tell her how he loved her. هذا الشيء طبعا مهم. How he loved her, and how she was the stake for which he ardently desired to play away all that he had in his life. These incidents confirm what Mrs. Sparsit thought about earlier. Now they are very close to each other. They are descending lower and lower on Mrs. Parsot's staircase, and now she stood hidden in the density of the shrubbery, considering what next, شنو راح يصير بعدين, until a climactic event took place. حدث شيء مهم في هذا الفصل. Louisa, coming out of the house, راحت للبيت وطلعت, hastily cloaked and muffled, and stealing away. She elopes. This is how Parsots see her. Elopes, تهرب. She falls from the lowermost stair, من أوطى نقطة بهذا الدرج, and is swallowed up in the gulf. تم ابتلاعها بهذا الخليج. Here we understand that Louisa is leaving her house in this rainy weather and moving somewhere else. Indifferent to the rain and moving with a quick, determined step, she moves and she goes to the train station. طبعا Mrs. Sparsit follows her. A train for Cooktown would come through presently. Sparsit knew, so she understood Cooktown to be her first place of destination. And now Mrs. Sparsit imagines and thinks that Louisa is taking the train for Cooktown and James is going to follow her and they would go together somewhere. This is how she thought about Louisa. Fire and steam and smoke and red light, a hiss, a crash, a bell, a shriek. Louisa put into one carriage وSparsit put into another بالقطار واثنيناتهم صعدوا. Where will she wait for him? This is how she thinks. Louisa took the train and she will meet James somewhere according to their plan. But Mrs. Sparsit was wrong in her calculations. Louisa got into no coach and was already gone. فتيهتها Mrs. Sparsit and she bursted into tears. قامت تبكي of bitterness and say, I have lost her. يعني as if she is a devil following this kind of person in order to show him or in order to lead him to do a crime. يعني chapter only feeds us with certain details about the development of the relationship between James and Louisa. Now we as readers understand through the character of Sparsit that James and Louisa are very close to each other. They got very close for the first time, but this kind of connection, this kind of contact is broken down, is destroyed when Louisa left the house and took a train and moved somewhere to Cooktown or to some other place because Sparsit lost her at the end of the journey. So all it shows how they are very together now, very close to each other now, and at the end of the chapter Louisa traveled somewhere. So we are to expect whether Louisa and James are going to meet at a different point according to Sparsit's thinking and the plan, or Louisa is going to have or to make a different step. She's going to her house, she's going to a friend, she's going somewhere. This is the content of this chapter, lower and lower. So the title is clear because they got very low in their relationship. They got down. How Gradgrind reacted to his wife with a very cold and business-like manner. He just buried his wife and went back to his business. Sparsit and Louisa. Sparsit is doing a huge role in describing the events and telling us everything about the relationship and the trap that she exposed, which was set by James by keeping Tom waiting at the station while he goes and sees Louisa, and how James and Louisa are portrayed, and Louisa's last move by leaving the house somewhere else we don't know, and this will be uncovered in the next chapter. These are the main points of chapter 11. Thank you.